Hello, Tom Roncelli, Real Estate One. I wanted to talk to you about appraisals. When a buyer wants to borrow the money to purchase a house, they typically go to a lender, a bank, a mortgage company, etc. These loans are insured by the federal government. We hear about Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, Ginnie Mae. These are pseudo-government agencies that insure the bank in the event that the buyer doesn't make the payments. The bank is actually made whole by the feds, and then the feds take the house back to a foreclosure, etc. Before the government will approve the loan, relative to, how much do they make, what's their debt service, etc., they send an appraiser out to the property. In the old days, and I call the old days, 10 years ago, right after the housing crash, they initiated what's called the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform Act. One of the requirements of Dodd-Frank is that the lender, the bank, I talk about the old days, they used to have a cadre or a stable, a group of appraisers that they had confidence and faith in, and they would send the appraiser out to the house to determine that they're not loaning too much money on it, that there's sufficient collateral. But with the Dodd-Frank Act, the lender is no longer able to talk to the appraiser, pick the appraiser, have any correspondence or communication with the appraiser. The appraiser is assigned by Fannie Mae. The appraisal is ordered online. It's a lottery. If you're an appraiser and you have a license, you sign up for a zip code, and you're communicated to by the feds, and you have a certain amount of time to say, I'll take the assignment. Well, one of the problems we're running into is that occasionally, unfortunately, if it only happens 1 out of 5 times, it's a problem. An appraiser takes the assignment, and he's actually from out of area here in Metro Detroit, Macomb, and Oakland County. Let's just use Macomb County, for example. There's a property in Grosse Pointe, Michigan, and the appraiser takes the assignment, and he's from West Bloomfield. Well, he may not know the nuances of that marketplace, the reputation, the trend, etc., but he's a member of the multi-list, and he goes and he picks the data. Let's say you sold a property for $250,000. The buyer was putting 10% down. The property still has to appraise for $250,000. If the appraisal comes in for $240,000, you got a $10,000 gap. There's several things that can happen when we face that problem. The buyer can throw in the difference in the money, the extra $10,000, everybody's happy. The seller can come down in the price $10,000, change it to $240,000. The buyer and the seller can compromise, they can meet halfway, or some combination of compromise. Or the seller can say, forget it, I'm going to put it back in the market, and the buyer might have been bluffing and throws in the money. Or the buyer can say, I don't want to buy the house anymore. The buyer might not feel that he wants to make that investment if the neighborhood doesn't support that value. Some of these things happen. So there is a potential for the transaction to fall apart if it doesn't appraise. There is a mortgage contingency in the purchase agreement that addresses that. If the property doesn't appraise, for value, then we're not going to have a transaction, and it's something to bear in mind. My last point is that if the property does not appraise, the seller's upset, the buyer's a little bit disappointed, but there's always this chance he's going to get it for less. But another issue comes up where the property in the appraiser's viewpoint is actually worth more than the sale price. We sold it for $250,000, and the appraiser is of the opinion it's worth $265,000. If the appraisal is issued at $265,000, sometimes the seller's upset that they oversold it. So the common situation is, if the appraiser feels that there is sufficient collateral, typically the lender will communicate to the listing agent or the seller, we have value. And as a seller, you never know what it really appraised for, but rest assured you're in a good position because your transaction's not going to fall apart. Sometimes the seller wants a copy of the appraisal. They're going to get it if it doesn't appraise, but they're probably not going to get it if it appraises at value or higher. Just because everybody gets upset, it doesn't belong to them. It belongs to the buyer and to the lender. So there's a little bit of information about appraisals. I hope this helps.